Anin, bonjour, hello. We start by saying hello in the language of those that have been here for thousands of years, and we express our gratitude for all of us being here on Michi-Sagik territory, for the care, for the teachings of these lands and waters and all of our relations. May we honor these teachings today and all days. So thank you for all of you joining us here at the Trent Magazine Live, a deeper look into the people, world issues, and conversations featured in the university's flagship publication. So my name is Jane Gray. I'm an assistant professor at Trent University in the School of Business. I'm also a proud alumni. I have a master's in sustainability studies, a PhD from the Channing Wenjack School of Indigenous Studies, and I focus on the intersections between governance, sustainability, management, and Indigenous knowledge. Well, very pleased to welcome the global Trent community into our Ethics for Organizations class with all these wonderful and amazing students. And we're delighted to host a special conversation with Trent experts about navigating truth in the digital age. It's my true honor to welcome our distinguished guests, Dr. Cristine de Clercy, Trent's Jarislowsky Chair in Trust and Political Leadership, and Dr. Kathryn Norlock, Associate Dean of Humanities and Social Sciences. Both of these people have accolades that could extend from here to the Otonabee or the Odenabe River. So just to be brief, Dr. de Clercy is one of Canada's foremost experts on the study of political leadership, and she's become a national leader in addressing the issue of disinformation and its effects on democracy. She's committed to expanding knowledge and training in the ethical practice of politics, fiduciary responsibility, and democratic government. And here she's working with students, with colleagues, 4 other chairholders, and the community to expand that knowledge. Dr. Norlock is a professor of philosophy, specializing in ethics with a focus on trust, belief formation, and the ethical dimensions of information in the digital age. As Associate Dean, she oversees Trent's new programming in AI. This gives students an opportunity to get a deeper understanding of the ethical, political, and social impacts of AI. So both of our guests were recently interviewed about navigating truth in the digital age for a feature article in the winter edition of Trent Magazine. They are sharing their expertise and how Trent University is tackling this issue through research and education and through critical thinking. So today we're expanding that conversation to all of you. And so without further ado, I would like to welcome Dr. de Clercy up for a keynote presentation, and that will be followed by a chat with Dr. Norlock as well. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gray, for your kind introduction. Welcome, everyone, to today's discussion. I'm a political scientist who specializes in studying political leadership. I became interested in disinformation, and particularly AI, because of the problem it poses for democratic leaders. When you think about it, in a democracy, especially a wonderful, sophisticated, relatively old democracy like Canada's, political leaders have a single lever, a single way that they can mobilize us in support of policies, to oppose policies, to do particular things, and that lever is communication, right? They can't force us, they can't buy our votes generally, they talk to us. And so the communication context of democratic politics is incredibly important. That's why in our current period, as the problem of disinformation spreads, as information sources become questionable and untrustworthy, the effort to address disinformation, to make people aware of how to deal with it, is deeply connected to protecting our democratic rights. This is a very short talk today, so I'm going to cover 5 main points. First, disinformation has large implications for Canadian democracy. Second, the technology is evolving faster than our ability to adapt to it and regulate it. Third, the 2025 provincial election in Ontario and the looming federal election will actually be a milestone. These will be the first AI elections in Canadian history. And thereafter, I expect politics will be quite different. For as citizens, we all need to monitor the information we consume and supply, especially during elections, much more so than we have ever done in the past. And 5, our governments are acting to combat the problem of disinformation and the rise of AI, but Canadians' trust in our electoral institutions will probably continue to diminish. So let me start with the first point. Disinformation has large implications for Canadian democracy. So just to get started, I want to give a brief definition. Disinformation is false information which is intended to mislead people. It is spread with the express purpose of deceiving or manipulating the information consumer. Also called propaganda, disinformation has existed for a very long time in human history. Propaganda is nothing new. However, technology in our time has now turned the capacity to spread disinformation into a very powerful weapon. So we have to understand it as a problem for our society. Often foreign actors use disinformation to try to accomplish political or economic goals or to destabilize societies, and there's much evidence around the world of this action and the consequential effects of disinformation. Canada has been rather protected from some of the most egregious examples of disinformation and its weaponization. However, about 2 years ago, in March of 2023, the headlines in Canada sort of woke people up because there were allegations that other countries had been acting in bad faith to use disinformation to interfere with our election processes and our political processes. As a consequence of those headlines, the Prime Minister appointed 2 closed-door security panels and also a very important commission, the Public Inquiry into Foreign Interference, led by Commissioner Hogue. In her report, which was actually released just a couple of weeks ago, Justice Hogue commented, quote, "It is true that some foreign states are trying to interfere in our democratic institutions, including electoral processes. There's no doubt in her mind." She went on to say, "This is nothing new and comes as no surprise. States have been trying to interfere in each other's businesses since time immemorial. What is new, however, is the means deployed by these states, the apparent scale of the issue, and public discourse on the topic." She went on to note in her summary report, "By fostering distrust, creating division, and preventing compromise, disinformation threatens the fundamental features of our democracy." So clearly, disinformation is a problem, and we have now excellent expert-led reports and testimony that attribute or testify to the scale of it and the scope of it and the speed of it. My second point, AI technology is evolving faster than our ability to regulate it. Now, AI presents many interesting and exciting opportunities for us. It is like any other technology. It has good applications and poor applications. However, with respect to our democratic context, AI is the tip of the spear of disinformation. For example, in the United States in the fall, just a few days before the American presidential election, there was a viral video that was viewed by hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people showing the destruction of ballot boxes. This was revealed to be fake, and not only was it fake, it was very clearly, upon investigation, shown that a foreign state actor had created the video to destabilize the vote. So the arrival of AI coincides with sort of a difficult time for us here in Canada. Our public trust levels, which are very important to preserving and ensuring stable democracy, have been declining for some time. Among OECD countries, we're still not doing too poorly. We're the number second in terms of declining trust levels, but levels of trust in government are declining in Canada. And again, this actually started before some of the disinformation problems that I'm talking about today. At the same time, AI innovation is expanding exponentially. Even experts in AI development are surprised by the pace of change in the last year alone. Generative AI can easily fabricate vast quantities of social media content and can impersonate politicians by using voice and image data to create deep fakes. Since the development of large language models in 2021, bots now deploy, quote, intricate behavior patterns that imitate organic behavior. In other words, bots start to look like humans, and it's very difficult to tell the difference. So these networks give the illusion of organic discussion and exchange. The rapid increase in AI-generated content has created what the Washington Post calls, this is important language, a fundamentally polluted information ecosystem. That's sort of what we're dealing with. That's pretty much where we're at right now. So this is the democratic context of our times, and we have to acknowledge how much it has already begun to shape and change the way that our elections happen. Third point, the 2025 provincial and federal elections are the first AI elections in Canadian history. So Canadians, we're in new territory now. The current Ontario election and the looming federal election in 2025 mark new milestones for us. Disinformation generally, and AI in particular, is transforming how our elections operate. And we need new laws, new habits. We need to recognize new responsibilities as citizens. Probably many of you are going to head to the ballot boxes for the first time in your lives. And you're heading into elections that are different. They will be different than the elections that preceded them, owing to the rise of this technology. Now, the Guardian of Elections in Canada is called Elections Canada. It's a federal agency. It has been monitoring developments and regulating the problem of disinformation for several years. And for example, in the last session of Parliament, Elections Canada recommended that Parliament pass a new law prohibiting the spread of false information with a specific goal of undermining an election and its results. Right now, we don't have that legislation in place. Elections Canada said this new law would capture situations where A, person knew the statement to be false that they were disseminating, and B, the statement was communicated expressly to underline trust in an election. A new law like this will make it a lot easier for elections officials to track and prosecute people who are actually actively spreading disinformation within the country. Another example of a much needed election law is one that forbids the impersonation of individuals in elections, but by expanding the current law to cover deepfakes and AI-generated impersonation. Right now, our laws actually don't cover AI impersonation, so prosecution of those who create and disseminate this sort of information is very difficult. The legislative tools don't exist. So clearly, the governments are aware of the problem and they are fashioning new laws to deal with it. But we're in a very interesting period where the technology has evolved ahead of our ability to regulate it. My fourth point argues we all need to monitor the information that we consume and supply, especially during voting and elections, in a much more active and responsible fashion. It's a truism in my field that political communication lies at the heart of all electoral processes. So the polluted information environment that we now face is quite a problem. I'm going to argue that all voters have a much sharper duty to monitor the information that we consume and that we pass along to our friends and colleagues and co-workers, particularly around elections. One key problem, as I'm sure you're all aware of, is that it can be very difficult to discern what is true and what is false. And actually, studies show that people often think something is false when it's actually true. We have a lot of trouble as consumers of information in this time trying to figure out what is true and what is false. This means that increasingly credible sources of information, like governmental websites, like national media organizations, like the university and intellectual community, these sources ought to become more prized, more accessed, more referred to as the information environment becomes more polluted. The days of blindly accessing information from our phones, from our laptops, without scrutinizing the source are pretty much over. We have to become more active and aware that there's a sea of disinformation headed toward us, and we are not very good at distinguishing fact from fiction. Finally, I want to note that our governments are acting. They are aware of the problem. They have traced its parameters. They are fashioning new legislation. But this will take time, and the way forward is going to be rather bumpy. I rather expect that our trust in political institutions will continue to decline. That's not a good thing. That's not a good thing for our democracy. Given the rapid advance of disinformation, the ongoing prospects of active foreign interference, the necessity to forge new law to regulate disinformation, and the blurring of real and fake political information that is already taking place, our trust, no doubt, will diminish. Within elections, parties and leaders in particular have much capacity and much responsibility to work together to ensure that the quality of information that parties disseminate to us, the public, is as true and correct as possible. These sorts of agreements, these sorts of norms and rules can be put into place pretty easily by the parties, who must recognize that even though they compete with each other for our votes, the main mission here is to preserve the democracy that frames the contest. We have to preserve it. We have to be aware of the threat. So as many of you head to the polls soon, and maybe for the first time, please remember it will take serious and coordinated efforts from governments, civil society, business, and all of us as citizens to protect our democracy from the rather staggering and new potential for manipulation, disruption, and deception that disinformation implies for our state. Thank you very much.
Thank you both so much again for being here to discuss this really, really important and such a timely topic. And you talked a little bit, Chris, about the fact that we're heading into elections and we're in this new age. And I think as you discussed, there's a lot of images, videos that can look really real to people. Can you talk a little bit more about how you can distinguish fact from fiction when we're looking at our social media?
Absolutely. Well, first I will say it is tricky sometimes. I've been a lot sharper lately in looking at my information sources, and sometimes I get it wrong, even though I'm being very active. There are some good strategies, though, and one of my favorite ones, especially in the political world, is that if you hear a story that just sounds too fantastic to be true, like how is this even possible? It's probably disinformation, and that's of course because the author wants you to grab it and pass it along out of curiosity, out of attraction to the topic to your friends. So if you hear stories that just seem too unusual to be true, it is probably disinformation. At minimum, you should check it. Another very good strategy is to check the source of information, right? Known media sources, national broadcasters, local papers, national newspaper chains, trustworthy websites. If something's happening like a new pandemic or an insurrection or whatever is the conspiracy theory of the day, they will be reporting it actively. So that's one way you can corroborate and check whether a rumor that you've heard, a video that you've seen is actually accurate.
Do you want to comment, Kathryn?
Oh, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm still Kate. And I would add two non-commercial sources are sort of a go-to, right? So my go-to tends to be if I see something in the news, many news outlets have an interest in us clicking on a headline just to see what's happening. So I really prefer non-commercial sources, which is usually government sources. This is a challenge when the thing I want to follow up on has anything to do with the USA, because in the last 2 weeks, a lot of those government web pages have been taken down. So most of my government sources are not available as they used to be. But of course, I do back up by simply trying to check multiple news outlets. What everybody's calling legacy media today, what I would call journalism with standards. So if I have two or more traditional media sources that are reporting on the same thing, generally they have standards according to the Associated Press by which they have to do some kind of verifiable and verified news reporting. I am a little biased in favor of traditional media because I did some journalism at the university level myself. But I think that's a good thing. I think if I had my way, all of us would do some journalism at the college and university levels so that we would know what those standards are and how to manipulate them ourselves.
Thanks so much. And just sort of sticking with, as Associate Dean, and how do you think education can better evolve to deal with misinformation, especially in the academic setting?
Yeah, I think education has multiple roles to play at grammar and high school levels, right, as well as post-secondary levels like this. So at grammar and high school levels, what we should be doing is trying more than we used to, more than we had to in the past, to emphasize what it is to be human, to stay human, to include human and interpersonal communication in everything we do. And I say this knowing every time a technology comes along, I am highly likely to incorporate it into my courses. So my students are currently, of course, using a learning management system, right? We're all using Blackboard, which is internet-based. When I'm at home, I want students to use Perusall. I want them to be annotating readings online. There is an algorithm that can grade it, but that's where I start putting the pause button saying, we have to be a little more concerted on purpose about what it is to be human and stay human, and make that content of our courses. So when students say things like, does ChatGPT have the right answers to this question, right? Can we use a prompt in my philosophy class and use ChatGPT to poke us to think, like, have you considered this objection? Have you considered that objection? What are the uses of online sources like ChatGPT and large learning systems? And what are the counter uses? When is it coming up with something other than the truth? So yeah, actually I think at every level, education could be doing a lot more than it does to talk in every sort of program, in every class, about the difference between human sources of information and not human. I could say like 10,000 more things, but we're told not to go on. So I'll contain myself, but I have lots more to say if you have questions after. Sorry, go ahead.
Chris, did you want to address that issue as well?
I'll just agree with my excellent colleague here. She makes excellent points.
We usually fight more.
But it is true. Technology presents wonderful opportunities, new efficiencies, many just great, interesting things. But at the same time, like with all technologies, the problem of AI and the rise of communication technologies has proceeded ahead of our capacity to grasp it, to regulate it, to corral it, to know when to use it, to understand the ethics around it. So we're in a space, I think, as a society where we're catching up. We're catching up to technology that has really exploded very quickly.
And even the reasons for it's getting ahead of us are superhuman, right? So when I talk to high school students at the secondary level who say they're using ChatGPT for everything, they use it as an answer site, right? They're using it to get answers to questions. And it's important to tell them your human interest is in answers. You want the truth, you want to know things. The interest of the LLM is not in answers, right? Like the designers of LLMs, their main interest is in our free labor as trainers. So what they want is not to provide answers. What they want is a lot of people to train the LLM. If that's why they'll present it as something that serves our human interest in answers, but actually only gives correct answers like 75% of the time, right? I had fun the other day getting it to say both that X was true and that not X was true, and it apologized to me both times. Like, I'm so sorry, you're right, I'm wrong. I'm like, no, I'm actually making you generate contradictions, you poor thing. So yeah, I mean, even our reasons that it's gotten away from us are human reasons, which is our interest in answers and truth and communication versus what it actually is. Sorry, go ahead.
No, absolutely. Thank you so much. It's so interesting that you talked about this idea of what it means to be human, because that is actually one of the topics in our class. And going a little bit further than that, how do we start getting back together in human communities, in universities, in our friend groups and so on, to start rebuilding the trust that you talk about that is eroding in different parts of the world as sort of a foundation for democracy? And Chris, maybe I'll start with you.
Well, it's fair to say everyone, governments, academics, organizations are concerned about the declining levels of trust. This is a problem. I'll also say trust is very complex. There is no silver bullet solution to reversing the tide. Rather, there are many solutions, many strategies we can take. The whole commission pointed a way forward for us as Canadians when Justice Hogue noted that increasing transparency within government and increasing the transparency of government communications with citizens and the frequency of citizen communications with governments will certainly help to rebuild trust, and I agree with that. Communication, again, is not only a context for democracy, it's actually one of the linchpins that connects citizens and governments together. So to the degree that we can improve the transparency of our communications, our trust in government hopefully will recover.
Thank you. Kate.
Yeah, I thoroughly agree with my colleague. Let's never fight again. We kid. We don't fight. Yeah, but I worry about the extent to which to build trust, to garner trust in people and cultivate it in each other like this, you really need trust-rich, truth-rich, knowledge-rich communities that help you do trusting together. That means not increasing class sizes. That means not increasing enrollment, because what you actually need, if you need a trust-rich, truth-rich environment in which to build trust, you need people who will talk to you about caring about the truth and present themselves as someone who cares about the things you care about. And often what we've been going to instead is, wouldn't it be more efficient in a lot of ways if we had 100, 200, 300 people in an online class graded by an algorithm, right? But that's not a trust-rich or truth-rich environment. That's one in which you're not being supported in your own interests in being in a truth-rich and trust-rich community. So I would encourage you to think of trust as a skill. There's such a thing as trusting too much, but there's also such a thing as not trusting enough. And the way to develop that skill and manage it is in the presence of other human beings that you can trust. So I actually think we have a lot of work to do to make sure elementary, secondary, and post-secondary education provides those kinds of environments that are trust supporting and trust teaching. And I seriously think we have to talk to each other on purpose about what it is to be human and what it means to stay human. Because we have neglected that. We assumed we didn't have to. And I think that's one of the reasons we're where we are, which isn't a bad place. I'm trying not to be dark.
No. Well, one of the first things we talk about is that trust is the foundation of not just all business relationships, but all relationships, without which those relationships would collapse. And these students do incredible group work together, and they build that trust. And I'm feeling very fortunate. The work that we get to do with students when they engage with one another, they bring all that knowledge and those good qualities to their work. So we have, I believe, time for a question.
Thank you. My question is Dr. Chris. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you. So, thank you. My question to Dr. Chris, you were talking about legislation in this age of disinformation. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to legislation to fight back disinformation and protect democracy, the counter argument comes it is a restricting freedom of speech. Especially a couple of days ago, the CEO of OpenAI, Sam Altman, was arguing that we have to rethink our social contract if we want to really integrate AI in our society and every sphere of our life. So in this, but from this perspective, how should we draw a balance between regulation of technology against the argument of restricting freedom of speech?
Thank you. That's an excellent question. And it pertains to not only the regulation of AI and disinformation, but to all regulation by governments that infringe on our rights to free speech, to free assembly, to the very heart of democratic rights. But all regulation that impinges on our rights to some extent comes down to the question of harm, right? And it is difficult, and I respect the legislators and the lawyers who spend countless hours trying to fashion laws that allow us to have a healthy democracy, but at the same time protect that democracy in ways that ensures its continuation. So just like the question of trust, there's no silver bullet way to fix it. There's no best way to regulate democracy except to realize that you want to allow people to be as free as possible, with the exception that when those freedoms begin to denigrate the quality of democracy, then government has a responsibility to step in a very small c conservative way to try to offset some of these problems.
Did you want to address that question?
Yeah, I'd add only that what counts as free speech is complex in a largely private sector commercial context for speech. So, like, just as a recent example, it is in technical terms what philosophers would call bullshit to say, that is a technical term in my field, to say that Canada is the source of much of the fentanyl in the USA. That is hard to prevent. You couldn't prevent someone from saying that. There are a lot of people in whose interest it is to spread that information by a number of different social media means. And whether to describe that as free speech or speech someone could censor is sort of beside the point, right? So you're in a largely private market-driven speech context in which it's almost impossible to prevent bullshit. Again, to use a technical term. I'm not really swearing.
That's a great way not just to end this conversation, but to keep the conversation going, because this conversation does need to keep going, because we're talking about something that is so precious, so valuable, that affects the future of everybody here in this room and beyond. So I want to say thank you both so very much for taking the time with us, for taking the time with the students and the broader community. And in true Trent spirit, let's continue to question, analyze, seek truth, and act in all we do. Thanks again for your participation, and be sure to check out all of the issues of Trent Magazine by visiting trentu.ca/Trent Magazine. Thank you so much.